The greatest rocket scientists in the world cannot explain how there is an image in the Shroud of Turin.
If it's a heavenly technology, if it's something involving the Spirit of God, then I don't think we ever will be able to figure it out, no matter how sophisticated our instruments become.
The Shroud of Turin. It's a mysterious relic. It's one of those things that makes a lot of people very curious. We're here in Turin, Italy, to investigate the Shroud of Turin.
For many years, the Shroud of Turin has baffled scientists, intrigued skeptics, and strengthened the faith of millions. But many others have dismissed the shroud altogether as a fraud and forgery. What is the truth behind the mysterious Shroud of Turin? Is it the genuine burial cloth of Jesus Christ, or one of history's greatest fabrications? Today, we will dive deep into the controversy, exploring the science, the faith, and the debate surrounding this ancient relic. To learn more about the shroud, I traveled to Texas to talk with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, a leading expert on biblical history and apologetics. He completed his doctoral residency in Oxford in collaboration with Oxford Center for Mission Studies and has just completed an amazing exhibit featuring the Shroud of Turin. What does the evidence truly reveal? And could this sacred cloth be the closest link we have to the resurrection of Jesus? Stay with us as we uncover the truth right here on InGrace.
Jeremiah, this is quite a mystery. So give us like the 30,000-foot overview of the Shroud of Turin.
Absolutely. And I was a skeptic of the Shroud of Turin. I was conditioned to be a skeptic, Jim. I have written and published in the academic space over 250,000 words on the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus. People would ask me, well, what do you think about the Shroud of Turin? Just naturally. And I wasn't prepared for the answer. And so I gave the only answer I knew. Oh, that's just a Catholic relic. I deal with evidence. I gave a very Oxford highbrow answer, but I had never looked into the evidence for myself.
The Shroud of Turin has been something that I haven't really even considered my whole life. And there are 3 reasons. Number 1, it is a relic. There are piles of relics, and it just seems too good to be true often with bones of this apostle or this thing from the other apostle. And I've always been very skeptical about that. It's also a Catholic relic, and I am not a Catholic. I love people that are Catholic, but I have major disagreements with the official position of the Roman Catholic Church, especially as it comes to salvation, because they teach salvation by works. And number 3, there have been studies, scientific studies, that date the shroud to the Middle Ages. Therefore, it couldn't be the shroud of Jesus. Now, I think, though, that it's worth a look. I think it's worth checking into it to see if we can discover if my reasoning is flawed and if this really could be the Shroud of Jesus.
The shroud is the most studied artifact in history. Over 500,000 hours, research hours, have been poured into Shroud of Turin research by 60 different academic disciplines. Jim, we're not talking about just a bunch of theologians who want the shroud to be true. In fact, they're the last to the party. We're talking about men and women who have true expertise in very specialized areas, who have studied the shroud, and they cannot explain how there is an image in the cloth. And they certainly don't believe that it's a forgery.
While Jeremiah is convinced of the authenticity of the shroud, I still have questions. I invited my friends, Dr. Scott Stripling, provost of the Bible Seminary and lead archaeologist at Shiloh, the largest dig in Israel, and Dr. Craig Evans, author, professor, and expert in biblical texts, to visit the National Museum of Funeral History in Houston, Texas, to learn their views on the Shroud of Turin.
I was very much against this. I thought it's too good to be true. It's a Catholic relic. I didn't want to be that guy to be, as an archaeologist, I don't want to be accused of being sensationalist and so forth, and just trying to guard my reputation. But I decided to look into it for myself. And when I did, there was nothing about it that didn't speak of authenticity. The age, the dating, the only part of the piece of the puzzle was the radiocarbon dating. And then when I saw that it had been in fires, well, then that explained that piece to me. Yeah.
And the radiocarbon dating was a sample taken and 3 labs tested it was it in the 80s, I think? And all 3 labs came back to like 700 years ago.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So that is the reason that a lot of people have dismissed it as a forgery.
I use carbon-14 testing a lot in my archaeological work, and seeing these dates that were from 700 years old, that bothered me. When I began to look into it and I realized that the shroud had been in a fire 500 years ago, at least one fire, probably 2 fires, the smoke that is absorbed into the shroud invalidates the carbon testing because there's carbon material in the smoke. So like if I took a carbon sample in the field and I knew that thing had been in a later fire, I would not test it even because I would know that it's unreliable. So putting a lot of weight on those carbon results when all the other results I now feel line up with authenticity.
Now, we know in the 16th century, when the shroud survives the fire, the nuns of the cathedral did what's referred to as an invisible weave to shore up the fraying edges of the shroud. And in that invisible weave, they used cotton. We know that the shroud fragments that were studied by the 3 labs in the carbon-14 dating, those fragments have cotton embedded in them. So they have been manipulated.
Well, that's
And so
contamination right there.
That's contamination.
You really can't trust that sample.
No, you can't. We have other no other areas have the cotton invisible weave. And that is, I mean, when we received the shroud, only then did I realize, wow, they took the furthest corner away and that's what they tested and did all the headlines and sensationalism with.
Wow.
Although the carbon dating of the shroud is problematic, and some think it was because there was smoke damage, water damage, or patching, there has been a brand new dating technology used, and this is breaking news, that dates the shroud all the way back to Jesus.
We've learned how to measure the deterioration of certain types of fragment, plant-based fragment, and that's what linen is, it's flax. And the unraveling and the slow disintegration is at a steady pace, and that has been unaffected by the exposure to smoke or carbon. That doesn't matter. And that has confirmed that it is, in fact, 2,000 years old, as all the rest of the evidence suggests.
These fibers in the Shroud of Turin match with great specificity the fibers from the textiles from Masada, the desert fortress of Masada in the Judean desert that fell to the Romans in AD 73. We can now see the degradation of the cellulose in the Masada fibers, and it's identical to that of the Shroud of Turin. If the Shroud of Turin is medieval, you would see a great discrepancy in the degradation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that lines up with the Shroud of Turin being from the time of Jesus.
Absolutely, because again, Masada is 1st century AD.
The dating of the shroud seems to fit, but how could it survive for 2,000 years? And what other evidence was found on the shroud that can help with its authenticity?
This beautiful linen, it's only 0.3 millimeters thick. And yet linen, it's based here on the flax plant fiber. Given the right circumstances and atmosphere, it's virtually indestructible. We have linen garments that are 3,000 years older than the Shroud of Turin.
And one of my assumptions on this was, well, how could a cloth survive this long and look as
Correct.
good as it still does, even though this one has been through a fire and water put on the fire, all of that stuff.
And what's fascinating about that, we see that that's consistent, and all four Gospels tell us. They use the words athonia, they use the word sinden. These are Greek terms describing fine linen that Jesus' body was buried in. So what's a shroud? It's a burial garment. From front to back and over the head, that's how Jesus is buried. And guess what, Jim? We have other first century burial garments, and guess what? They're linen. So this is consistent with what we know of the archaeology of Jesus in Judaica.
I would love to send you this video series, The Shroud of Turin Fact or Fiction. When you support InGrace with a gift of any amount, I'm going to thank you with this incredible series. We would also love for you to get your very own olive wood communion cup and this beautiful painting of Resurrection Sunday.
Receive this full-length video series for your gift of any amount to InGrace. For gifts of $50 or more, you will also receive a beautiful olive wood cup. If you give $200 or more, we will send you our special Easter bundle, which includes the Resurrection Canvas, video series, and olive wood cup. Call 800-78-GRACE or visit ingrace.tv for more information.
The journey of the shroud is also very interesting. Of course, it would have had to have started in Jerusalem, and then it is said to have made its way to Constantinople, which is Istanbul, and then it traced its way all around Europe, eventually ending up here in Turin, Italy. This is St. John the Baptist Church, and here in Turin, it's kept under lock and key.
So the shroud obviously has an issue, and that's the provenance. How do we know, how did it get from Jerusalem to eventually northern Italy and Turin?
We see here in the Codex. This is 200 years before the supposed carbon-14 dating. You see a shroud of Jesus depicted, and it not only has the herringbone weave, but it also has the L-shaped burn holes.
Oh, wow.
So the source material must have been the shroud. Another thing I'll mention quickly, Jim, is that we have pollen from all of the areas where the shroud is known to have traveled. We don't just have pollen on the shroud from April in Jerusalem. We have pollen on the shroud through Edessa, that's Turkey, Constantinople, Athens, up to France, all the way into Turin. And so we actually see evidence on the shroud itself that it has been in all of these places where we have records, thanks to Eusebius and others.
We have pollens that went extinct in the Byzantine period that are on the Shroud of Turin, which means they are older than the Byzantine period, which means it would be impossible for a forger, be one very smart forger, smarter than you or me, who can somehow go back and find, pre-Byzantine period pollen and place that all over the Shroud of Turin. Similarly, there are limestone particles on the shroud. Tiny, microscopic limestone particles. You see them under magnification. The limestone chemical signature in Jerusalem is different from the limestone chemical signature in Italy. And a geologist can spot it like that. We have limestone particles that come from Jerusalem. So again, you're telling me that this forger in the medieval period was smart enough to go to a Jerusalem tomb and get tiny pieces of limestone and then to sprinkle them all over his forgery. You see what I'm saying? Inductively, it all adds up.
The dating seems to fit. The pollen seems to prove the previous locations of the shroud, especially from Israel, and the limestone from Jerusalem is astounding. But what exactly does the image on the shroud show, and how was that image transferred to the fabric?
All right, let's talk about the image a little bit because it is superficial. Superficial. So describe that. You have a tight shot of, this is one of the linen fibers, and there's like 200 different strands in that one thread. So how many of those strands actually have that image on it?
Well, and Jim, this is what probably pushed me over the edge. The best rocket scientists. We're talking about weapons scientists. We're talking about the Sandia Labs, Los Alamos Labs. The greatest rocket scientists in the world cannot explain how there is an image in the Shroud of Turin. So here in this superimposed image, this is one thread. And you can see, okay, maybe 200, maybe 150, somewhere in there. But the image itself is only embedded in 2 or 3 of those fibers. It doesn't go all the way through. If you and I were painting it or trying to create a hoax, we couldn't do that.
No, absolutely.
This is where the miracle of, I think, the Shroud comes in. It has to be a miracle. We don't have words to express how it happened today. So are we comfortable to say miracle? I am.
Oh, sure.
It's only 2 or 3 fibers of each thread thick. It is essentially a bolt of light, 34,000 trillion strong of watts, that happens in 1/40th of a billionth of a second. It happens fast enough it doesn't just incinerate the shroud, but it's robust enough where it not only leaves the image, but it leaves this 3D encoding where, again, 2,000 years later in 1976, scientists are using the best technology they have at the time. We still don't know exactly how the image formed.
Yeah.
We do know it was incredible energy that happened in a flash.
And we know that Jesus is the light of the world. We know that he created light before the sun. And so it would make sense that at the resurrection, at the very second of his body coming back to life, there would be this burst of light
brighter
from
than
within.
the sun. And we see that reflected in Paul's own testimony in the book of Acts. When he sees the resurrected Jesus is brighter than the noonday sun.
You can't see it under a microscope. That's what rules out. It's not paint. It's not any kind of stain or pigment. It isn't a scorch. There's no artwork involved. So there's a technology there that is out of this world. If it's a heavenly technology, if it's something involving the Spirit of God, that power and that energy, then I don't think we ever will be able to figure it out, no matter how sophisticated our instruments become. This is the genuine first century burial cloth of Jesus. The image is in it, which wasn't recognized in any kind of a scientific way until the invention of photography, and it was discovered to be, in essence, a negative, so that the photographic negative reversed it, and it looked like a positive, and you could see the image more clearly.
This is not the first photograph ever taken, but it's the first photograph taken with a generator and a flash photography where the exposure took hours. Secondo Pia is an attorney. There was no such thing as a professional photographer in those days. And he takes the photo, it's on glass plates, it goes into development, and then he begins to see the shroud that appears positive in the negative.
Okay, so explain why that would be. The shroud has an image, but then it turns out that the image on the shroud is a negative?
Yes, and in the photographic negative, which is here on the right, we actually see the image in the positive. So many more details are available when you see the negative of it.
This also would give you his height and what he looked like.
Yeah, and I've seen computer images based on what we can see of the shroud and the musculature, which, by the way, we haven't talked about from an artwork point of view, but the musculature of the figure in the shroud is accurate. And so the image in the shroud matches everything we know about our studies of skeletons and so on. So the shroud, again, it just fits in the first century. Everything about it doesn't fit in the Middle Ages.
Because they were able to take photographic positives and negatives of the shroud, 2 scientists were able to use a powerful machine to find 3-dimensional characteristics of the man in the shroud using these images.
These 2 scholars, Eric Jumper and John Jackson, had what was called a VP8 image analyzer. And when they put a picture of the shroud, they didn't have the shroud itself, that was in Turin, Italy. They had a picture of the shroud, and they had Henri's photograph, and they put it in, And notice that it had this three-dimensional, as you rightly say, this encoded 3D characteristics in the shroud. When they put pictures of their grandchildren in, they just look vague and smattered and almost illegible. But there was something in the shroud where you could see the dynamism of the image. It was 3D. And that's when the scholars and the scientists from the Air Force Academy showed this evidence. That's what gave rise to what became the Shroud of Turin research project, where 2 years later, they would be in Turin studying the shroud itself.
Well, I have to admit, the Shroud of Turin has a lot more to it than I ever thought possible. So the question is it real or is it fake? That we will have to discover next time. But before we go, let me just tell you this. The most important thing is not if this relic is real or not. The most important thing is, did Jesus rise again? If he did, it's all true. He's God, he paid for our sin, and he'll save you if you'll put your faith in him. For by grace are you saved through faith. It's not of works. It's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. If you've never put your trust in, not a religion, not a relic, but in Jesus, please do that today. He can save you today, and he'll keep you saved forever. I'm also so thankful for all of you that support InGrace. We thank you that we can bring this content to you as we go around the world investigating the truths of the Word of God. I'd also like to have you check out our InGrace YouTube channel. We have an Israel channel that connects all of these things back to Israel, and we also have an InGrace Adventure channel. Both of these channels will surely bless you, and we also have a InGrace Roku channel. To find out more information about our ministry and to get more resources like books and videos, you can go to ingrace.us. God bless you. You don't want to miss our next InGrace. I would love to send you this video series, The Shroud of Turin Fact or Fiction. When you support InGrace with a gift of any amount, I'm going to thank you with this incredible series. We would also love for you to get your very own olive wood communion cup and this beautiful painting of Resurrection Sunday.
Receive this full-length video series for your gift of any amount to InGrace. For gifts of $50 or more, you will also receive a beautiful olive wood cup. If you give $200 or more, we will send you our special Easter bundle, which includes the Resurrection Canvas, video series, and olive wood cup. Call 800-78-GRACE or visit ingrace.tv for more information. Could the Shroud of Turin really be the burial cloth of Jesus? See the answer next week on InGrace.
If we're going to accept the science, we're going to accept all of the evidence we have. I think the most sensible conclusion is it's Jesus of Nazareth. To me, that's the most rational and best explanation, given the facts we know.
Record every single InGrace episode. You will be so blessed as we learn all about God's world and God's Word. InGrace is a viewer-supported ministry. Thank you for your prayers and gifts.